This is slightly unusual because I'm going to speak about my own country. And there is two aspects to this. One is Britain is in the deepest political crisis since World War II. Every news broadcast for hours, every single day, discusses only the question of Brexit. Every party in the country is split over the question of Brexit. I have to write thousands and thousands of words in Britain over the question of Brexit because I can't not deal with the biggest crisis in my country's history for almost 80 years. But I am not going to speak about the internal crisis in Britain. If somebody wants to ask me a question at the end, and I'm going to answer them apparently from another room, then I will discuss the situation in Britain, but I'm not going to deal with that because I think that's just a British matter. I want to deal with a different question, which is, what is the effect for China of this crisis? I think China has developed very well, but China has to deal with its own issues. So if something can be very important in my country, but it's not necessarily very important for China, in that case, I don't write about it, to be quite honest, in China. I probably write about it in Britain, but I don't write about it in China. This is different because what I want to explain, and this is why I'm pleased to do the lecture, is this Brexit crisis does have consequences for China. And I think that there was a misunderstanding in the Chinese media for quite a long time that it thought Brexit was some domestic British question, or even it was very funny. There was this very strange person called Boris Johnson who had a very strange hair and did very peculiar things, and perhaps this was very funny, but it was not very serious. This was, to be quite honest, a misunderstanding of the situation. As I want to explain, it actually is serious from the point of the situation in China. So it's the part of the Brexit crisis I'm going to deal with is the consequences of Brexit and the crisis for China, not the domestic one. But if somebody wants to ask me a question, I'll deal with it, right? Okay. Let's look at a very important question. Trump intervened very openly into British politics to support Boris Johnson becoming Prime Minister. Normally, as you know, the protocol is that states do not comment very much on the internal affairs of other countries. Particularly, the President of the United States normally does not say things about domestic British politics. Trump did not follow this rule at all. He openly attacked the former Prime Minister, Theresa May, and said she had very bad policy, her negotiation with the EU was very bad, and he supported Brexit. He then openly said that Boris Johnson was very good, he would make a very good Prime Minister, he was excellent, he was very famous, he referred to him as Britain's Trump. It apparently, the biggest compliment that President Trump can think of is to say that somebody in another country is like him. This tells us something about President Trump, but anyway. And he was quite open about it. We know that since Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, with the support of Trump, by a mechanism that I'll explain to you later, they have been in constant contact. It was revealed that in 1 week alone, there had been 3 telephone calls between Trump and Johnson. About a week and a half ago, the American National Security Advisor, John Bolton, a very hardline anti-China person, incidentally, was in Britain, and he said that President Trump and Boris Johnson had already spoken 5 or 6 times on the phone. In fact, by now, Boris Johnson has been in office only a few weeks. Trump has had many more telephone conversations with Boris Johnson than he had with Theresa May during the whole 3 years in which she was Prime Minister. Now, Trump is a person who doesn't waste his time, so if he has very good reason to have a lot of conversation with Boris Johnson, we can know that he expects to get something out of this situation. So the first thing that we want to know is, what does he want to get out of the situation? But there's a second feature of the situation which is very peculiar. On the screen you can see the first British politician to meet Boris Johnson after he was elected president. He met him, I think, if my memory is correct, I think 1 day or 2 days after Trump was elected president. This is not the leader of the Conservative Party. This is the leader of the Brexit Party, Nigel Farage. This is very unusual. Also, it tells us something about the situation. Normally, you would expect that the first meeting of a newly elected president of the United States would be with the governing party. So you would have expected, therefore, him to meet with the Conservative Party, either personally with the Prime Minister at that time, Theresa May, or with a representative of the Conservative Party. Instead, Farage went to New York and met with Trump, obviously at Trump's invitation, and Trump would only have met. Donald Trump put out a tweet saying that Nigel Farage would make a very good ambassador of Britain to the United States. Again, this is very unusual. The United States does not normally say to China, well, we would like this person to become the ambassador of China to the United States, and if they did, we can be certain this person would not get the job. So therefore, this is also therefore very unusual. Why does he meet with somebody who is not a member of the governing party as the first person that he meets after his election? This also shows you a picture in the British press of the way that they understand the relation between Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage. You can see the very big person is Nigel Farage, and the person in the pocket is Boris Johnson. Now, this is rather unusual. You would think that the most important person in the country was the Prime Minister, and therefore that it would be a situation in which, the big person would be the Prime Minister and there would be a little Nigel Farage. Why is it understood, therefore, that instead the Prime Minister is a very small person in the pocket of Nigel Farage, and Nigel Farage is a very good friend, as we've seen, of President Trump? What does this tell us about the situation? It's because Trump understands that Nigel Farage is a dagger pointed at the throat of Boris Johnson. In the British political system, the Conservative Party at the last election got slightly over 40% of the vote. That's normal, that with 40% of the vote, you can be elected the government of the country. But the Brexit Party, led by Farage, who is very close to Trump, at the European elections got almost 30% of the vote, and the Tory party got 9%. In other words, the Brexit Party could destroy the votes of the Conservative Party. What it really shows is that Farage, as we've seen, is so close to Trump, and really Farage is controlled by Trump. What Trump is therefore saying is, this is what he says to Boris Johnson: if you do not do what I want, I will cut your throat politically. I will support Farage, who will take away 20% of the vote, and you have no chance of winning an election. You will be the shortest Prime Minister in British history. Or, if you do what I want, then maybe Nigel Farage will decide he doesn't want to run election, he's not very interested in standing, maybe the Tory party will get 40%, you will then be the Prime Minister. So in other words, I, Donald Trump, control you, Boris Johnson's fate. Do what I say, or I will destroy you. That is what these sets of relationships, in fact, reveal about the situation. Look at this situation. Trump, therefore, plays two cards in Britain. He plays the card of he supports Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, but he also has a means to crush Boris Johnson if Boris Johnson doesn't do what he wants, and he will succeed. If Farage runs against the Tory party, Johnson will just be defeated in the election. This is not a bluff being made by Trump. This is the real situation. So what, therefore, does Trump want out of this situation? Why is he paying so much attention to the question of Brexit? Why is he intervening so much in British politics? And what are the consequences of all this for China? To do this, we need to go back and look at the real situation of the US economy. Now, I know that last year in China there was a debate about the US economy because I was one of the people who was writing in this debate, so I know all about it. There were two views. One, Trump says the US economy is very, very strong, we are growing very, very fast, we have very powerful economy, China must surrender to the United States, nobody else is as good as the United States, etc. That's what he says in propaganda. The truth is quite different, as we will see. And I've written a lot of articles of this, including guanschool. I also wrote an article in the magazine, one of the magazines of the Central Bank of China, to explain the real situation. The real situation is the US economy is slowing down. I will show you the details in a minute of the way the US economy is slowing down. Far from Trump's economic position being very strong, Trump's economic position is getting weaker. We can already see this very dramatically during the last days. During the new data which came out from the United States on the second quarter of GDP shows that the US economy has slowed down. There is a lot of discussion in the Trump administration. They're very worried. They're very worried about the trade war with China because their expectation, or Trump's claim, was that the US economy would be very, very strong. Therefore, China would have to surrender in the trade war. Instead, China hits back and the US economy is slowing down. This is not very good for President Trump's position because, of course, the number one question for Trump is to be re-elected. And his election is in November next year, so he hasn't got much more than a year to deal with this situation. So if the US economy is slowing down, this is bad news for Trump. So I really want to show you, therefore, to understand this, what is the real situation of the US economy? Because some people in China misunderstand this by writing that the US economy is strong. This shows you the very long-term trend of growth of the US economy. Obviously, in the US has a business cycle. It goes up and down. All economies go up and down, like all capitalist economies go up and down. Right. So the best thing to see what is the real trend is to take a long-term average for the growth rate. I've taken 20 years because this removes the effect of all the ups and downs which take place inside the economy. It just shows you the underlying trend. As you can see, in 1969, the US average annual growth rate was 4.4%. By the time you get to 2018, the US growth rate is only 2.1%. In other words, in a 50-year period, the US economy's growth rate has slowed by half. This shows you that these forces must be very, very powerful because this is a process which has been going on for 50 years. If a process goes on for 50 years, it is not very easy to reverse it. This means that Trump has a big problem. If a process has been taking place for 50 years, it is controlled by very powerful forces. So therefore, it's very difficult for him to turn it round. Secondly, I want to show the immediate situation of the US economy in the business cycle, the up and down of the business cycle. As you can see, there is the average growth rate of the US economy, slowing down to 2.1%. That's the slowly going down line. Then, of course, as you would expect with the business cycle, the US economy fluctuates above and below this business cycle. We can see the 3.2% towards the end of the line is the growth rate of the US in the second quarter of 2018. This is when Trump launched the trade war against China in that quarter. At that time, he was tactically skillful. We'll see he was not very skillful strategically, but he was very tactically skillful because he launched the trade war against China, at the time when the US economy was growing most strongly. But as you can see, ever since then, the US economy has been slowing down. And the US economy has now slowed down to 2.1%, and it's going to get slower. This is a problem. A year ago, as I say, in both the Chinese media and in the US media, people were saying, will the US economy slow down or will it continue to grow strongly? I was writing articles explaining that the US economy will slow down. Now there is no discussion in the United States about whether the US economy will slow down. Everybody writes the US economy is slowing down. The discussion is between whether those people who think there will be a recession in the United States, that is 2 quarters of negative growth, and those people who merely think the economy will slow down. Just to give you my opinion on that, I don't think there will be a recession, certainly this year. It's possible there will be a recession next year, but I still don't think it's the most probable. But what will happen is the economy will slow down. This, of course, is bad news for President Trump. It settled the discussion, incidentally, in China, or it should have done, because I know that there were people who were writing. There are some people, I'm told, who are called the 5 cent, I found out today, who always praise the United States. And I know that they were writing a year ago, oh, the economy is incredibly strong, the Trump tax cuts are a huge success, China is very weak, we must surrender in the trade war, we must do whatever the United States thinks because the US economy is so strong. I know this was happening because I was writing articles attacking them and show it's not true. They were proved to be totally wrong. The US economy is slowing down. I mean, I was watching American TV this morning. The only discussion is how much is the economy going to slow down? Now, for what it's worth, this is the prediction of the International Monetary Fund. The International Monetary Fund is not an organization controlled by China. This is, if anything, it's biased against China and it's a bit pro the United States. Its projection is that by 2020, the US economy will slow down to 1.9%. It's very difficult to predict to, 1.8%, 1.9%, 2.1%. Nobody really knows that. What they do know, and which I also agree with, is that the US economy in 2020 will slow down more. And this is very bad news for Trump, because the 2020 is the election year. What is Trump's response to this? He's trying to reorganize the trading system, the world trading system, away from a multilateral one. He says, look, the World Trade Organization rules, which are multilateral, China has been very successful. It's true that the United States created the World Trade Organization, but competing within the system, China has been very successful. Therefore, we have to change the situation. We have to change the rules. Not, I must make the US economy more successful. Nobody could do anything about that. If he embarked upon some very sensible policy in the United States, he spent a lot of money on infrastructure, or he spent a lot of money developing ICT, or he had very good education policy, China couldn't stop this. The US economy would just be very successful. But he can't do that. He doesn't want to do that. Therefore, what he's trying to do is slow down China's economy. And one of the ways to slow down the China economy is to change the rules of the international trading system. And that is where the Brexit question comes in, begins to come in. Because you understand, as long as Britain is a member of the European Union, Britain does not control its own trade. The European Union sets the rules of trade because the European Union has a common tariff, it has a common industrial policy. Therefore, the European Union does not set the trading rules. Furthermore, the most important country within the European Union is Germany, a very strong and powerful economy. I'll come on to in a little bit later on what Trump thinks about the question of Germany. Therefore, if Trump wants to change the trading rules for Britain, he doesn't believe that he can persuade the European Union to adopt policies which are just the US rules. Therefore, he has to try to get countries to leave the European Union so that they will then accept US trading rules. This is therefore where the Brexit question comes in, right? Therefore, he's got a number of things in this. Firstly, he wants to slow down China's economy. He can't deal with that through the WTO. Therefore, what he's trying to do, as is imposing tariffs and trying to slow China's economy by that means. But what he is trying to do is all those countries that he can control, he's trying to introduce new rules which are against China and for the United States. So the first place he started is in North America, because Canada and Mexico are, of course, in the weakest position compared to the United States. So he's got rid of the old North American Free Trade Organization, NAFTA, and he has a new deal called the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement. This is actually, as regards tariffs, not very different to the old NAFTA, not a thing. The crucial thing is that Trump has put into the new agreement anti-China rules. If you don't mind, as I want to be exact, I will read you out what these new rules exactly are, right? The new agreement talks about what it calls non-market economies, by which it means China. It doesn't say China, it just uses a code word for it. The new agreement says 3 months prior to commencing negotiations, that is with negotiations with the non-market economy, a party shall inform the other party of its intentions to commence free trade agreement negotiations with a non-market economy. That means if Mexico or Canada wants to start trade negotiations with China, Mexico or Canada must tell the United States 3 months before these negotiations start that it is going to start trade negotiations. And we can be sure that during this 3 months, the United States will be very active, saying, please don't, well, not please, don't enter into these trade negotiations. Secondly, it says, that party, that's the one which is entering into the agreement with China, shall provide the other parties with an opportunity to review the full text of the agreement. That means if Canada or Mexico want to have a trade agreement with China, they must give the full text of this for the United States to read and to object to. Then, third, entry by any party into a free trade agreement with a non-market country shall allow the other parties to terminate this agreement. In other words, if Mexico or Canada enters into an agreement with China, which the United States doesn't like, then the United States can abandon the whole agreement with these countries. That is, sabotage the trade. So in other words, it gives to the United States veto rights over Mexico and Canada negotiating with China. And that's almost the only change of any significance between the old NAFTA and the new agreement which Trump has signed. Now, obviously, we can be sure if Britain can be swayed to enter into a free trade agreement with the United States, it will contain the same clauses. It will contain also that if Britain wants to enter into trade negotiations with China, it must tell the United States 3 months in advance. It must allow the United States to see the text of this for 3 months, and if the United States doesn't like the agreement, then the United States can abandon its free trade agreement. That is the obvious intention. So you begin to see now that the Brexit question has consequences for China. We can go back only a few years to the period when Cameron was Prime Minister of Britain. You had the so-called golden period of relations between China and Britain. If you remember, Cameron came over here, he was very nice. President Xi Jinping went to Britain. This was a very successful visit. And Cameron had a very rational strategy. Cameron's strategy was to make Britain the base for Chinese companies to operate in Europe. And Britain had some quite big advantages in this. London is the most important international financial centre in the world outside of New York, And indeed, in foreign exchange, London is a bigger market than New York. Therefore, for internationalization of the RMB, London is an ideal place. As I was in charge of London's economic policy for 8 years, and I had many, many meetings with the financial institutions in the centre of London, I know how much time they spent on China. There was a joke, which was the following. The Chinese Spring Festival is very close to the British Christmas, the European Christmas, and the bankers used to say it's terrible from the point of view of weight, because first we have to go to all these dinners at the time of Christmas to celebrate this, and then only about 1 month to 6 weeks later we have to go to all these dinners to celebrate the Chinese New Year. And therefore it's impossible to control our weight at this time of the year. So that was a joke. That was because they spent an enormous amount of time dealing with China. Also, Cameron invited the head of Huawei to come to 10 Downing Street, his official residence. Cameron allowed Huawei to participate in the building of the British telecommunications system. Britain knows that the main first foreign language that is spoken by Chinese people normally is English. Therefore, being in London is much easier for Chinese companies to operate in than being in France or Germany. So Cameron's strategy was a very sensible strategy. Many advantages for Britain in this. At that time, Britain joined the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank despite the opposition of the United States. So Cameron was able to pursue a very independent policy. Now, Britain would become a vassal state of the United States. Britain could not enter into any agreement with China without the agreement of the United States, if the agreement of the type which was made with Mexico or Canada was made. So for this reason, Trump is very interested in the question of Brexit. He wants to bring Britain into the same position as with Mexico or Canada, and for that he needs Britain to leave the European Union. Question then you've got coming is the question of Germany, the person who's on the left, right, Angela Merkel. Trump considers that Germany is the number 2 enemy in the world in the point of view of the economy. Number 1 enemy in the economy is China, but number 2 enemy is Germany. Why? Because Germany has a very big and successful economy. Germany has a very big trade surplus, including with the United States. Germany has a per capita GDP growth through most of the 21st century that is as fast as the United States, and it's a very strong country. In fact, a Trump official said the following: when it comes to trade negotiations, the EU is worse than China, only smaller. Right. And Trump knows that the EU makes Germany even more powerful because Germany dominates economically the European Union. It's true on political matters. Germany has to make some compromises, in particular with France and with some other countries. But from the point of view of the economy, Germany does that. There are only 2 countries in the world which have enough money to really help the United States, if they can be forced to give money to the United States. Trump understands that. Number 1 is China, which has more money than anybody except the United States. And number 2 is Germany, because it has this huge trade surplus. Therefore, Trump thinks that Germany is a huge enemy inside of Europe, and he wants to weaken Germany by getting countries to leave the European Union. So that's the first position of his why he doesn't like Germany. Secondly, in all European countries, therefore, now, Trump looks for allies. He tries to, therefore, create anti-German policy current inside all the European countries because he doesn't like Germany. So this is Salvini. Salvini is the deputy prime minister of Italy. Salvini doesn't like Germany at all. He spends all his time attacking Germany, saying Germany is terrible, and he's a huge fan of Trump. He says Trump is great. Perhaps Trump will soon say Salvini is the Italian Trump, but he's not yet quite. Boris Johnson's here, Salvini's only here, if you see what I mean. Salvini, by no accident, totally opposes Italy's agreement over the Belt and Road. As you know, Italy became the first G7 country, the first major European country, to officially support the Belt and Road Initiative. Although that is the position of the Italian government, Salvini, who's the Deputy Prime Minister, is openly opposed to this. Therefore, Trump likes Mr. Salvini very much. I could go through all the European countries and find you these people, pro-Trump, anti-Trump, pro-German, anti-German. Right, okay. But Trump knows that Salvini can't get Italy to leave the European Union. He doesn't have the relation of forces to do that. He would like it, but he can't do it. The difference with Britain is the one country which might be persuaded to leave the European Union. Therefore, although he likes Salvini very much, at the moment he's actually paying more attention to the question in Britain because Britain is where he hopes to have the biggest success. We can begin to see that this Brexit question and the relationships with the European Union have big consequences from the point of view of the situation for China, because European Union is a very big economic power. We'll come on to that later. Now we can begin to get a picture of what it is that Trump wants out of the situation. Trump wants to get Britain out of the European Union so that he can get it into a trade agreement at the same time as with Canada and Mexico, and that trade agreement will be aimed against China. He can't get the other European countries to leave the European Union, but he wants to build up anti-German, pro-Trump currents within all these countries. We got a very interesting view about this. The first official meeting of Johnson as Prime Minister and Trump will take place at the G7 meeting in a few days. Trump is showing how much he likes Johnson because, at least according to the original timetable, which can always be changed in 20 seconds by Trump, if Johnson says something Trump doesn't like or he criticises his tie or something like that, the meeting can be cancelled. But as I speak, the schedule is that the first meeting that Trump will have with the G7, even before the official summit, is with Boris Johnson. That's just to show that who Trump favours at the present time. But although they've had many speeches on the telephone, Trump sent his most trusted hardline advisor, that is John Bolton, the national security advisor of the United States, a very, very anti-China person, to Britain to negotiate with Johnson in order to prepare all the things which before the G7. Bolton, who is not a very tactful person, unfortunately was not very skillful in hiding the real situation. As I say, he gave away the information of how frequently Trump and Johnson were speaking on the phone. Johnson had not said this in Britain because he doesn't want to be seen as a dog of the United States. So he hadn't said, every other day I'm on the telephone to President Trump to receive my instructions. He hadn't said that, but John Bolton, who's not very skillful diplomatically, comes here and says, Johnson and Trump, they speak on the phone all the time. He repeated how critical Trump had been of Theresa May and that he should have new, different type of trade negotiations. Again, if you don't mind, I will read a few things from the British press just to show that what I'm telling you is not simply my view. So I'm going to take first the Financial Times' comments on Bolton's trip. As you know, this is one of the most important British newspapers, and it has to give some objective information. Right? This is what the Financial Times wrote. Mr. Bolton said the Prime Minister and President, who will meet at the G7 meeting in France this month, had 5 or 6 telephone calls since Mr. Johnson moved into Downing Street. The two leaders spoke on Monday, with Mr. Trump expressing his appreciation for the UK's steadfast partnership in addressing global challenges, the White House said. Steadfast partnership means Britain is doing what the United States tells it to. That's what steadfast partnership means. Right, okay. Mr. Bolton said the Trump administration regarded a successful UK exit from the EU as being very much in our interest. That's in the interest of the United States. It's not very polite. He didn't come to Britain and say, oh, Brexit is very much in the interests of Britain, we hope you have big success. He came here and said, Brexit is very much in the interests of the United States, thank you very much. Also, Bolton revealed things about Huawei. As you say, Cameron's policy was very clear. Huawei can participate in almost all the British telecommunications system. Theresa May was already under some pressure from Trump, and she restricted Huawei's participation a bit. She tried to keep it out of some core parts of 5G, but nevertheless Huawei would be able to participate in the 5G system. Bolton made very clear that one of his top targets was to get Britain to change this position and for Britain to ban Huawei from participating in the telecommunications system. In this case, again, if you don't mind, I'll read so to show it's not just giving my opinion. This is what the British media is writing. I'll take this from The Guardian. John Bolton, the hawkish US National Security Advisor, has started 2 days of meeting in London with key figures in Boris Johnson's government as the US pitches to steer a post-Brexit UK further away from Europe, which means more towards the United States, on a range of issues including trade, the Iran nuclear deal, and the role of the Chinese technology firm Huawei. Bolton is the most senior Trump official to visit since Johnson became Prime Minister, and the move is seen to have increased the chances of the UK leaving the European Union on the 31st of October without a withdrawal agreement, a position more in line with the Brexit policy favoured by the United States. Just so you understand why this question, the withdrawal agreement, is crucial. The European Union has two sets of structures. There are the political structures and there are the economic structures. You can be a member of the economic structures of the European Union without being a member of the political structure. In fact, several countries are. Norway is, Switzerland is in large part. It's crucial. Therefore, some people in Britain argue that Britain should leave the political structures of the European Union, but remain part of the common market, remain part of the free trade area, etc. That's not acceptable for Trump, because his whole aim is to force Britain through a free trade agreement with the United States. It's not enough for Trump that, therefore, Britain leave the political structures of the European Union. It must leave the economic structures. That's why he was opposed to Theresa May's deal. Theresa May's deal, Britain did leave the political structure of the European Union. It would no longer formally be a member of the European Union, but it had a good chance. It was not quite clear, but there was a very good chance it would remain within the economic structures. Trump is unacceptable. It must have a deal to leave the economic structures of the European Union, which is unlikely, or it must just leave with no deal. He's got to get it out of the economic structures. Then it says, I repeat the article, Bolton will be testing how the UK intends to position itself as a country freeing itself of the shackles of the EU. That's his quote. He characterises Britain's advantages of the trading agreements in the European Union as the shackles of the EU. Now, what Bolton was very pleased to find out about was that Boris Johnson was indeed very willing to consider changing the position on Huawei. He didn't announce that he would exclude Huawei. Johnson was prepared to discuss with the United States eliminating Huawei from the British telecommunications system, which is, for a European country, one of the biggest telecommunications systems in the world. Again, I'll read you what was said. John Bolton, US National Security Advisor, has said British officials have told him that Boris Johnson's government will look from square one. That means with no preconditions. No agreement that Huawei will participate. We look at it from a blank sheet of paper. At the issue of whether the UK should use Huawei technology for its 5G telecoms network. Mr. Bolton, who held talks with Mr. Johnson and other senior officials on Monday, said the main purpose of his 2-day trip to London was to express Mr. Trump's, quotes, desire to see a successful UK exit, which means exit, please leave, from the EU, and, quote, his hope that we can have a fully comprehensive bilateral trade agreement with Britain as soon as possible. That means I would like you to sign up to the clauses with Mexico and Canada as quickly as possible. That's what that means. The ultimate objective is a comprehensive trade agreement covering all trade and goods and services. Now, you should understand from the point of view of Britain, this is absolutely ridiculous. 48% of Britain's trade is with the European Union, and only 10% is with the United States. So in other words, you would get with this Brexit a bad deal on 48% of your trade in return for a good deal on 10% of your trade. This is absolutely ridiculous. No business person would need to think about this for more than 10 seconds in order to know that this is completely absurd. What it is strongly in the interest, of course, is strongly in the interests of the United States. Then this is again what is quoted from The Guardian. His comments, that's Bolton's comments, suggest the UK is considering reversing Theresa May's provisional decision to allow the Chinese telecoms group, that is Huawei, to build some non-core parts of Britain's 5G network. Mr. Bolton, the most senior US official to visit Mr. Johnson since he took over as Prime Minister last month, said Britain's new government appreciated, we like the US's views on issues including China, Huawei and Iran. They, that is UK officials, said in particular they're looking really from square one on the Huawei issue. They were very concerned about not having any compromise in security of telecommunications in the 5G space. This is ridiculous. There is no security question with Huawei. If there was a security question with Huawei, it would have been publicized a long time ago and the company would be destroyed. The first revelation that there is a real security issue with Huawei and the company is finished. So we have absolutely sure there is no security issue with Huawei. Right. To repeat from Trump, they were very concerned about not having any compromise on security of telecommunications. What they said was, this is what Bill Bolton's speaking, we would like to review this and be very sure about our decision. That means change the previous decision and come to a new one. We too are concerned about the security of our 5G telecommunications network. So in other words, what Bolton's come here, in addition to the trade deal, is to ensure that Britain stops having the high-quality, good value, cheaper telecommunication system from Huawei and instead gets a less efficient, not so advanced and more expensive telecommunication system in the interest of the United States. Right. This is not the only issue on which Bolton was very concerned. He also wants to change Britain's policy on Iran. As you know, the United States withdrew from the deal with Iran, the not nuclear deal with Iran, but Britain, together with the other European Union countries, remains in the agreement with Iran. Bolton therefore wants Britain to change its position and to withdraw from or to criticise the Iran deal, a very important point of policy. I'm sure you've been following, because I know guanschool has been running articles about it, all the business about the seizure of Iranian tanker in Gibraltar and all those types of questions. Again, I'll read you, this is again The Guardian's interpretation of what's going on. Bolton is hoping that a Johnson administration will gradually adopt a foreign policy on Iran more independent of its two former EU partners, Germany and France, after Brexit, and closer to the policy imposed by Trump. His visit, that's Bolton's visit, is a chance to test how far Johnson's premiership is leading to tangible initial changes in UK's security policy. If Britain were to abandon the concept of a European maritime security force in the Gulf, because the European Union wants to send some European ships to the Gulf to deal with security questions, it doesn't want US ships, because it thinks that US is very provocative to Iran and they may create some incidents, so it doesn't want the US warships there. If Britain were to abandon the concept of a European maritime security force in the Gulf, for example, that could be seen as a prelude to a deeper shift on Iran, that is a shift towards US policy. With Brexit imminent and the prospect of a US-UK trade deal to be done, he, Johnson, will be looking forward to curry favour with Trump. So in other words, what is involved, therefore, on the Brexit question is a completely comprehensive reorganisation of British policy on China and on many other issues towards the United States. The way I would put it is that what Johnson proposes is that Britain should become the 51st state of the United States. The only difference is that Britain would be inferior to the other 50 states because at least the other 50 states get a vote, including who's president, whereas Britain would carry out US policy without even having a vote on this. So it's a sort of 51st state within brackets state of the United States. So therefore, I hope by all this, I've convinced you that very much more involved, including for China in Brexit, than the question that Boris Johnson has a very strange hairstyle, or Britain seems to engage in very strange internal activities. This has serious consequences. Britain is not anymore a superpower, but Britain is still, depending how you measure it, the 5th or 6th largest economy in the world. It's therefore a significant economy for China, and it was one that very recently had very favourable relations with China, which Trump is trying, therefore, to greatly reverse. Therefore, this whole question of Brexit is not purely domestic Britain. It will significantly, its outcome, affect China. I say it will because it's not yet decided. The reason there is a very, very big political crisis in Britain is this policy of Johnson is against the interests of the British people, because it means that they will become subordinate to the United States, they will have bad relations with China, they will have worse economic relationships with Europe, therefore it's against the interests of the British people. Therefore there is a big fight going on in Britain. That's why there's such a deep crisis, and why I'm up in the middle of the night. I write on China in the day, and in the middle of the night I'm writing on Britain for the UK. Right, okay. I want to put this, and also it's part of the struggle. We may say in Europe there is a struggle, not an open struggle, but really of the interests of China and the interests of the United States in Europe, because the pro-Trump forces in Europe are more hostile to China, and what we may call the more pro-EU and more pro-German forces are more favourable to China, because we know Germany is a very, very important trading partner of China. China is Germany's biggest external market. Chancellor Merkel comes to China very regularly, and therefore you have, in a certain sense, a fight between the interests of China and the interests of the United States in Europe. It doesn't take directly the form of China intervening, but nevertheless it takes the form of a fight between Germany and the United States, but nevertheless the interests of China are involved. I'd like to finish just by making some remarks on putting this in a wider context. I've put up on the screen 2 continents, Europe and Latin America. And the reason I put them there is because in most parts of the world, the fight for public opinion and alignment of governments between China and the United States is already decided, and in my opinion can't be changed. In developing Asia, China has won. It's true, Japan is against China, but Japan is having bad relations even with South Korea at the moment, so this is not. But almost all the developing countries of Asia, particularly in Southeast Asia, there's some frictions with India, China has won. They all want good relations. Why is there no big crisis in the South China Sea? The United States tries to create the crisis because the countries around the China Sea don't want it. Indonesia doesn't want a crisis in the South China Sea. Philippines doesn't want a crisis in the South China Sea. Even Vietnam doesn't want a big crisis in the South China Sea. Therefore, really China's won that fight. In Africa, in my opinion, also China has won the fight. In North America, it is impossible for China to win the fight. It doesn't matter at the moment how skillful CCTV is, how many issues are produced by China daily, how good the propaganda is. Even if guanschool runs the operation in the United States, China will lose in the situation in the United States. It can neutralize a few things, but because the United States controls it. That leaves really only two continents in which it's not clear who is going to win. The first is Latin America. Now, that's a very important change. Traditionally, Latin America has been completely controlled by the United States. But this is beginning to change very strongly because China is the biggest trading partner now of many important countries in Latin America. For example, China is absolutely key trading partner for Brazil. China is an absolutely key trading partner for Argentina, for Chile. This shows big change in public opinion. For the first time ever in Argentina, a recent opinion poll showed more people have a favourable attitude towards China than have a favourable attitude towards the United States. This is an incredible change which has taken place. So Latin America is an area where there's a fight going on for influence. China should produce lots of material in Spanish, Portuguese, other things, not pay so much attention to English, pay more attention to Spanish, Portuguese. The other place is inside Europe. There it's not so clear because China is not such a big trading partner. They're the most important trading partners of the European Union are the European Union countries themselves. But nevertheless, for example, in Germany, polls show that who do you regard as the biggest threat to world peace? The polls show that it's the United States. Germany is very favourable to economic ties with China. There are some frictions on these questions. Therefore, Europe is the place in which there is a fight going on between the influence of China and the United States, or not the influence, the favourable attitude. So that's why I put those two continents up. And that shows you the European Union is one of the important, and Britain is part of this, because Trump is trying to take Britain from being favourable to China to trying to take Britain to being non-favourable to China. Second thing is, how important is this whole fight in Europe for China? The answer is very important, because the European Union is a huge economic. This is showing you the GDP of the United States, Europe and China. This is at current exchange rates. As you can see, European Union is very, very large, not very far behind the United States. Right. But even this understates the position, because that is at official exchange rates. But as economists know, the parity purchasing powers is a better measure of the real size of markets. I mean, a smartphone in China is much cheaper than a smartphone in the United States. A can of Coca-Cola in China, I know, is half the price of a can of Coca-Cola in my country, or Diet Coke, because I drink that. So therefore, it's better to measure in the real PPPs, the real size of markets. On that, of course, China is number one in the world, but even the European Union is bigger than the United States. So therefore, as a size of market for Chinese companies, the European Union is extremely important situation for the United States. If you look at it from the point of view of the growth which is going to take place in the economies, again, you can see there's not much difference between the European Union and the United States. This is in addition to the question of the fact that the European Union is going to be is technologically not very far behind the United States. So therefore, China has advanced to very important technological markets. If you look at the expansion, where is China's success? Really, China's success is in developing countries. The Belt and Road Initiative is absolutely crucial because it contains many, many developing countries. For example, India. If I could make a polite observation, I like China very much, but I don't think it gets everything right. I think China underestimates the question of India. India's economy is growing very strongly and will continue to grow very strongly for a long time. And I think China needs to pay a lot of attention to India. I know that some problems create with India, but that. As you can see, in terms of real expansion of markets, India is more important than the question of the European Union. If we look at the details of the Belt and Road Initiative, you can see three places are really big developments. One is the domestic expansion of China. The second is the expansion of India. While India is not politically, formally part of the Belt and Road Initiative, nevertheless, economically, it's very integrated into this situation. India can't cut itself out from the Belt and Road Initiative. And then ASEAN. This means, therefore, even if China is cut off from the United States, it still has the capacity to grow very much through the development of the Belt and Road Initiative. One final little thing, slightly humorous, but you might find it interesting. You might think that Chinese Marxism has no influence in Britain. You're not quite right. British labour movement historically was very, very weak theoretically. It was often said it owed more to Methodism, that is to religion, than to Marxism. The result of which is therefore Marxists have always had much more influence in Britain than their numbers indicate. And really there were two groups in Britain that were important. There were the supporters of the former Soviet Communist Party, and there were the supporters of the Chinese Communist Party. This is from the date of the Soviet-Chinese split. The supporters of the former Soviet Communist Party in Britain support Brexit. Their policy is crazy. They are pursuing a policy which aids Trump. And the people who, on the contrary, like the policies of China and Chinese Marxism within Britain are, on the contrary, against Brexit for all the reasons I've explained here. So it's a rather strange situation. But in Britain, as some people wrote in the newspapers, in Britain a fight is taking place over Brexit between the Russians and the Chinese, is the way that it was written. It's not actually either Russians or Chinese, it is actually people who follow their ideological views. This has some influence, incidentally, because in some parts of the country they're quite influential. They're small in number, but influential. Final thing that I want to go back to and deal with right at the end is, what I've really tried to convince you of in all this, therefore, is, firstly, why is there such a deep crisis in Britain? Why the biggest political crisis since World War II? Because Britain is being under the pressure of the United States to do something which is against the interests of the British people. And it's also against the interests of parts of British capital. Therefore, there is a big fight takes place. But secondly, this fight has consequences for the situation in China. That's what I've really wanted to explain to you. And that's really part of the question of a wider context of China's positions. Because I think I followed the situation in Latin America very closely, and I followed the situation in Europe very closely, because these are the two areas where it's not decided. It does, as I said, in North America, China can have the best propaganda in the world, and it won't win the battle for public opinion in the United States at the present time. It doesn't mean that the public opinion in the United States will attack China. A lot of public opinion in the United States just wants to be left alone. It doesn't want Trump's policies. All the opinion polls in the United States show that Trump's tariffs are unpopular, not popular, but they don't want to pay more prices. They're not really for China. They just want to be left alone. But in Europe and in Latin America is an issue in which the actual intervention of China can be rather important. Okay. Therefore, that's really what I wanted to say. I try not to bore people in China with the affairs of my country. Obviously, I follow the affairs of my country rather closely. If the matter is important for my country, I don't talk about it very much, but it's not important for China. I don't talk about it very much inside China, because this is China's country. It's got its own problems, own issues to deal with. In this case, what I wanted to do was how to explain to you, and I hope I've done, the fight which is taking place over Brexit in Britain is worth following carefully, because it does have consequences for China. Thank you very much for listening.